Super excited to be here. I always like to start presentations like this just getting a sense of how familiar y'all are. How many of you use Khan Academy in your schools in some way, shape, or form? Okay, good. How many of you have children who've used it? How many of you have used it yourself? Good. How many of you really don't know what Khan Academy is and you're kind of just curious? Okay. Oh, actually, wow, this is a few people afraid to raise their hands. Well, it sounds like most of y'all are somewhat familiar with it, and you know, a lot of times we're associated with videos that I started making for family almost 12, 13 years ago now. But those of y'all who use it more know that it's much, much more than videos, and actually the core of what we do is practice and feedback, teacher tools, allowing students to master concepts at their own pace. But just to get everyone on the same page for at least what these videos look like, I'll show you this next montage.
Of these interactions are just due to the gravity.
This is an age right after Isaac Newton.
I'm told the humidity makes it feel hotter. Why is this?
Excellent question, LeBron.
And you can just see the pleasure he had.
The right to privacy as such is not spelled out in the Constitution. Of course, the word liberty is.
Things actually can interbreed, although for these two in particular, it seems like the mechanics would get kind of difficult.
And I can keep playing around with these numbers and see what kind of colors I can come up with.
If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
Euler's identity is always a hit with an educated crowd. As I mentioned, it's much more than videos. This is, your students are probably on it doing something like this. And it's not just math, and it's not just students facing. There's teacher tools. This is some of the advanced level, high school level, and AP level American history and world history that we have on the site. This is you can see some of the game mechanics and mastery mechanics we have. This is just get a sense of, as I mentioned, math is where we started, but we're now going really deep into especially high school level sciences and humanities, and we're actually going to start our first pilot of English and language art at the younger grades, starting next year, hopefully. And we're doing these partnerships with folks like the College Board around getting people college ready, as evidenced by things like the SAT. And this is a snapshot of where we are now. You know, any of y'all who've been following Khan Academy for the last 5, 10 years would probably have the same type of sensation I have when I look at these numbers, is that, wow, it's been a bit of a journey. And to appreciate it, I'll give a little bit of a background on how all this started. And Stephanie mentioned some of it, and I think some of y'all might know parts of it. If you rewind back 12, 13 years, I had just gotten married. I was in Boston. Family was visiting me. My cousin Nadia was having trouble in math. She was 12 years old. I offered to tutor her when she went back to New Orleans. So we do that every day after work for me, after school for her. Slowly but surely, she got caught up with her class, got a little ahead of her class. At that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin, and I called up her school. I'm sure y'all appreciate calls like this. And I said, I think she should be able to take that placement exam. They had put her into a remedial math class before, and they said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And they let her, and that same Nadia, who was in a remedial math class, was then put into an advanced math class. And so I was hooked. I started working with her younger brothers. The small firm I was working for, my day job, I was an analyst at an investment firm. We had moved out to Northern California, but more relevant to this story, word gets around my family that free tutoring is going on. And I find myself every day after work with about 10, 15 cousins, family, friends from around the country, and I was getting on a conference line with them, and we used to use Yahoo Instant Messenger to try to communicate and share pictures of problems to work on. And I immediately saw that there was a common theme. A lot of my cousins were struggling, not because they weren't bright, not because the subject matter was difficult, it was because they had gaps in their knowledge. And so I started writing the earliest version of Khan Academy for them, really as a family project, so they can get quizzes and feedback on things like dividing decimals or adding fractions, even if they were in 9th grade or 10th grade, so they can build that strong foundation. And that was the first Khan Academy. Had absolutely nothing to do with videos. And then in November of 2006, I was at a dinner party showing one of my buddies this project that I had for my family. And he tells me, well, that's all cool, Sal, but how are you scaling your lessons? And I said, you know, it's hard. And he said, well, why don't you record them as videos and upload them onto YouTube for your family? And I immediately said, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano, It is not for serious mathematics. But I went home that weekend. I got over the idea that it was not my idea, and I decided to give it a shot. And you know, that first kind of still up there was stuff that I just saw my cousins were having a lot of problems with. It happened to be public. After a month, I famously asked my cousins for feedback, and they told me they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And it's worth thinking about what they were saying and what they weren't. They weren't saying that they didn't appreciate me, and that the fact that I was there for them and I was helping to motivate them and I was helping to unblock them. But what they were saying is, hey, if it's 10 o'clock at night and you're trying to do your homework and no one's there to help you, it's nice to have these on-demand kind of supplemental lessons. If you're in 9th grade and you forgot how to divide decimals, you don't have to be embarrassed. You can go there. You don't have to tell it to your parents or your tutor or your teacher. You can just review what you need. So I took it as positive feedback, kept going, and it soon became clear that people who were not my cousins were watching. And at first, the view count just started growing, and then the comments started to come in on YouTube. A lot of those original comments were thank you. Even that I thought was a pretty big deal. I don't know how much time you spend on YouTube. Most of the comments are not thank you. They're a little edgier. But then they got more intense. I remember in early 2007, I got a letter from a mother, and I brought my wife over. I was like, look at this. And the mother had said that this was the only way that her 2 sons with a learning disability were able to keep up with their class. And because of that, her and her entire family were praying for me and my entire family. And that'd be powerful by any measure, but you got to remember it was especially powerful and strange for me. My day job, I was an analyst at a hedge fund. I was not used to people praying for me, at least in that way. So you fast forward to, by 2009, there were about 50, 100,000 people who were using this content on a monthly basis, and I frankly had trouble focusing on my day job. And so I set up Khan Academy as a not-for-profit. I sat down with my wife. We had some money saved up for a down payment on a house. And so, well, maybe I could put all of our energy into this and make it into a real organization. Maybe one day this could reach millions of kids and empower millions of teachers and classrooms and whatever else. And my wife agreed with me. She thought that there was something there. And so we said, well, maybe we could live off of savings for about a year. So I took that plunge, that entrepreneurial plunge, that I think a lot of y'all in this room have taken as y'all try to start your schools. And I think anytime you do anything entrepreneurial, whether it's in the for-profit sector, whether it's a charter school, whether it's a nonprofit like Khan Academy or a school, you almost have to start with that delusional optimism. You have to just assume that surely this is going to help the world, so the world will come and help this thing exist. But then you go out there and you start talking to funders, and you start getting a lot of, oh, this is interesting, but our budget has been allocated this year, or this isn't exactly what our strategy is about, or we don't exactly understand how this is going to do X, Y, or Z. And so you can imagine after about 9 months of that, it was pretty stressful. Our first child had been born. We were digging into our savings, about $5,000 a month. It was quickly no longer a down payment on a house. And you know, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm guessing a lot of y'all have been there, where I was just, what have I done to my career? What have I done to my family, with my infant child, et cetera, et cetera? And then all of a sudden, I was getting some donations off of PayPal. It was a few $100s a month. If it was any of you, thank you. But while that was happening, all of a sudden, a $10,000 donation came in. So I immediately see who it is. Her name is Ann Doer. So I immediately email her. I said, dear Ann, thank you so much for this incredibly generous donation. This is the largest donation that Khan Academy has ever received. If we were a physical school, you would now have a building named after you. And Ann immediately responds back. She's like, well, I'm local. She was in the neighboring town. I'd love to learn more about what you're doing. So we scheduled lunch about a week later. We're in an Indian buffet restaurant. And Ann, over lunch, says, well, so what's your goal here? And I said, when you fill out the paperwork with the IRS to be a nonprofit, there's a part of the form, this is mission : they give you about a line and a half. I filled out a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And Ann said, well, that's ambitious. How do you see yourself doing that? And I said, to be clear, it's a mission statement. I don't think I'm going to be able to check it off this weekend and then move on to healthcare or something. I have some ideas. But I showed her, I used to walk around with a notebook of testimonials from around the world of people who it's helped. I showed her how the usage was growing exponentially. I showed her the software that I was writing for my cousins. And I said, look, I want to cover all of the core academic subjects. I actually already had built the first version of our teacher tools, where I was the only user of that at the time. But I was like, imagine if every teacher on the planet was empowered where they knew in real time where their students were. And they could do focused interventions. And they could let every student remediate their gaps and accelerate as necessary. Imagine if this was localized into all the regions of the world, if the videos were translated. And Anne said, well, wow, you've made a surprising amount of progress. I only have one question. How are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. So she processes that, we part ways. 10 minutes later, I'm in my driveway, and I get a text message from Anne, and it says, you really need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. So that was a good day. That was really big. And frankly, that was the beginning of a whole cascade of events that even today feel a little bit surreal to me. A month later, I was running a summer program for middle school students. The whole reason I was is I never viewed virtual as somehow a replacement for physical instruction. I always viewed virtual, if kids can get practice and feedback and teachers have tools, well, it could liberate the physical experience to do more games and simulations and Socratic dialogue and peer-to-peer learning or small group intervention. And so I was in the middle of those. I had a little stock simulation with some 7th graders, and all of a sudden I start getting text messages from Anne, which you can imagine I now take very seriously. And there were 4 or 5, and it was kind of cryptic, not clear what order they came in, but they essentially said, this was Anne writing, I'm at the Aspen Ideas Festival in the main pavilion, Bill Gates on stage, last 5 minutes talking about Khan Academy. So I didn't know what to make of this, so I immediately boot the nearest 7th grader off of a computer, and I look for some evidence of this thing that Anne is talking about, and actually I was able to find the delayed live stream after about 5 minutes, and this is what I saw.
There's a new website that I've just been using with my kids recently called Khan Academy, K-H-A-N. Just one guy doing some unbelievable 15-minute tutorials. My favorite vignette is that guy, Salman Khan. He was a hedge fund guy making lots of money, and he quit to do these little web videos. And so we have moved, I'd say, about 160 IQ points from the hedge fund category into the teaching many people in a leveraged way category. So, you know, that was a good day, the day that his wife let him quit his job.
So you could imagine maybe what was, I mean, I was literally nervous when I saw that. I remember going home that night, I showed my wife this video, and I said, well, what do I do now? Well, what's the protocol? Do I call him? Just assuming he's not listed. And they had me in that limbo state for about 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I'm in my walk-in closet, which was the worldwide headquarters of Khan Academy at the time, about to record a video, and my cell rings. It's a Seattle number, so I answer. Hello? Hi, this is Larry Cohen. I'm Bill Gates' chief of staff. You might have heard that Bill's a fan. Yeah, I heard that. And we'd love to figure out ways that we could maybe work with you if you're coming up to Seattle over the next few weeks, and if you're free. And I was looking at my calendar for the month, completely blank. And I said, yeah, you know, maybe next Wednesday I've got to cut my nails, do some laundry, but I think I can meet with Bill. So we had that meeting, and it was eerily similar to that meeting with Anne. What would you do with more resources? Tools for teachers, tools for school leaders so they can understand what's happening, so students can learn at their own time and pace, translate it. At the same time, folks from Google reached out and said, hey, we've been using you with our own children, and I had no idea, and we would like to think about, can we scale this to the world somehow? And so all of a sudden, in fall of 2010, the stars aligned, and Khan Academy got its first real funding to get office space, start hiring up a team of researchers, teachers, engineers, designers to start really investing in what we were about. And to understand the core idea behind Khan Academy, we'll just take a lens at how education happens in most places today. So in most places, kids, the education system all of us grew up in, or most of us did, kids are grouped together, usually by age and around middle school, age and perceived ability. And you're moved ahead at a fixed pace. And what typically will happen is, let's say we're in a middle school pre-algebra class, and we're covering basic exponents. The teacher will give a lecture, then we'll do some homework, lecture, homework, lecture, homework. And then after about 2 weeks, there'll be a test. And let's say on that test, I get a 70%, you get a 80%, you over there get a 95%. And even though that test has identified gaps in our learning, I didn't know 30% that happened to be on that test. Even that A student, what was that 5% she didn't know? It might be a careless error, or it might be something important. Even though those gaps exist, the whole class will then move on to the next concept. And that's probably going to be a concept that builds on those gaps. It'll probably be negative exponents or logarithms. And then the process happens again. And so we keep going through the system, just accumulating those gaps. And then you get to an algebra class, that's where it typically happens, and students hit a wall. Not because algebra is difficult, not because they're not bright. And I saw my cousins go through this multiple times. It's because they are a little shaky on their decimals or their negative numbers, and there's a decimal with a negative number in that equation. And there's no way for that teacher, no matter how heroic they may be, to be able to meet that individual need for all 30 of their students. There's just not enough time in the day for that. And what this leads to, and this is a stat that to appreciate kind of how absurd this is, imagine if we did other things in our life that way. Say home building. So you bring in the contractor and you say, we have 2 weeks to build the foundation, do what you can. And so they do what they can. They could be a great contractor, but after 2 weeks, the inspector comes and says, okay, the concrete's still wet over there, that part's not up to code. I'll give it an 80%. You say, great, that's a C, let's build the first floor. Same thing. You do what you can. It could be the best contractor on the planet. After 2 weeks, inspector comes and says, that's a 90%. You say, okay, that's a B plus, great. Let's build the second floor or third floor. And then while you're doing that, the structure collapses. And if your reaction to that is the reaction that the public often has to education, they'll say, oh, well, maybe the contractor wasn't good enough, or maybe we needed more inspection. Maybe that's part of it, but the real issue is that the process was flawed. You're artificially constraining when and how long to do something, pretty much ensuring a variable outcome. You're taking the trouble of measuring that variable outcome, but then you're ignoring the deficiencies and then you're building on those, essentially ensuring that there's going to be some type of wall hitting at some point. And what this is happening at a national level, and this is the stat I was talking about that was surprising to me, is that 70% of kids in America at community colleges have to take remedial math, that they're placed into remedial math, which is a euphemism for 6th or 7th grade math. So what that's telling us is these students have gone through the motions of 8th grade, 9th grade, algebra, algebra 2, geometry, trig for the last 4 or 5 years, but because they had those gaps, it really was just going through the motions. And so our theory of change is, well, what if we didn't have to make that compromise? What if teachers were given the tools to let every student work at a pace that is appropriate for them? And so, starting in 2010 with some of that first funding from the Gates Foundation and from Google and many others who've supported Khan Academy, since we have over 200,000 donors, average donation size $20, to make this happen, we've been really investing in that practice platform for teachers in classrooms. And this is a few screenshots, but it's this idea: students can go, they can figure out what their weaknesses are, they can learn at their own time and pace, get immediate feedback, and then they can advance as necessary, and that the teachers know where they are. And what you see here, these are screenshots of actually on the left of something that's about to be launched next year. How many of you use the NAA map growth in your schools? Okay, so it's a reasonable number, y'all. So one of the, Stephanie was mentioning this partnership with the SAT, where the PSAT, which used to be kind of this random test that we took in 10th or 11th grade, now acts as a diagnostic for personalized practice on Khan Academy. And hundreds of thousands of kids every year are able to use it that way, and then we can see the efficacy as they go to the SAT. But we said, well, wouldn't it be powerful if we were able to partner with a major interim assessments at the elementary school level and the middle school level as well? And so we went to the folks that we view as the gold standard in interim assessment. All of the efficacy studies on Khan Academy, most of the efficacy studies on Khan Academy, we use the NAA map growth as our benchmark. And so we said, hey, wouldn't it be powerful if that assessment, which a lot of folks are taking, 25% of all the kids in America, right now if a teacher learns that their kids are behind grade level, there's very little they can do. They said, well, I'm told that I have to just keep on going at grade level, so that's what I'll do. But what if there was a way to have an intervention that doesn't ask the teacher to upend everything, their entire curriculum? And so the MAP folks, the NAA folks were like, yeah, we're hearing districts and teachers and schools want this as well. So now, starting this fall, we're starting a pilot where the NAA MAP growth acts as diagnostic and placement into Khan Academy. So folks can use Khan Academy, and many of y'all already do, but for those of y'all who use the MAP growth, you now have that extra layer where it's going to inform a personalized learning plan. And then at the teacher and at the administrator level, you can understand where your students are, and you can kind of fill in those gaps as necessary, do the interventions, figure out what's working and what's not working, and also have very rapid cycle efficacy studies in your own school or in your own charter network where you can understand what's working and what's not, because you can see how that work is tied to hopefully better than expected growth on the map. And what's exciting about doing this here in Las Vegas is actually our first major pilot is the Clark County School District. This is Dr. Jesus Jara. And you know, he just started as a superintendent here in Clark County. And he's really emphasized, look, at a big, diverse, urban school district like Clark County, 5th largest school district in America, he needs to have better information, but it can't just be information in a vacuum, which traditional standardized assessment has been. It's got to be information that's actually actionable, that's actually doable by teachers. And what we're seeing is if they're able to put in even 45 minutes a week, it's growing the students 20, 30% more than expected. Oh, whoops. Oh, if we can back up. Oh. These are if we could back up once. I forgot to intro that. I just didn't want to say random kids screaming. That video, which you're about to see, is what I always emphasize is when people imagine online learning and things like that, they imagine this Vulcan or Borg reality where like kids are just on a computer and only worried about themselves. But the opportunity is, I think, much nicer, which is if students are able to learn at their own time and pace, if they're able to collaborate with each other, if the tools create mechanics where the teacher can motivate students and they can achieve shared goals, not just around their academic competency, but also around things like grit and perseverance and shared effort, it can actually humanize the classroom and actually create a whole other level of energy. And so what you're going to see in this video, these are kids who are part of the LearnStorm Challenge, which we do every back to school, and we're going to do this back to school. Some of y'all might have participated in it. And this is kids trying to understand whether as a group, they have achieved their classroom's objectives in this LearnStorm Challenge. And you can see it's not just this Vulcan or Borg reality. Now I'll play it. So as I mentioned, you know, we as a not-for-profit, we only want to do this if it's working for students. And so Stephanie had mentioned the efficacy studies we've been doing with the SAT and from PSAT to the SAT. And what we've been seeing in district after district, if students are even able to put in 45 minutes a week of true personalized practice and master concepts at their own time and pace, they're able to go 20 to 30% more than expected. And even when I saw those initial numbers, I was a little bit surprised. But when you really think about it, a lot of traditional practice, you know, traditional homework, it's like being told to go practice your free throws, but not knowing whether you made any of them until the next morning. Or practice your free throws when, in fact, you need to practice your dribbling or your three-pointer or your passing. And so if teachers can get the supports, where at least for part of, let's say call it 10, 20% of the learning time associated with the classroom, they're able to do that intervention, it can make a really big difference for a lot of students. And another question that we've always had is, look, when you do something online, we exist in order to help level the playing field, bring equity, but what if because of technology access, we're actually making the situation worse? And so we're pretty serious about measuring who's using Khan Academy and then making sure we're able to partner with folks who can help bring it to the students who need it most. We want to make sure everything on Khan Academy is available on mobile devices, so it's more accessible. And what we're seeing is that we actually are being used proportionally by everyone in the country, and if anything, we have a slightly higher usage by African American, Latino students, and English language learner students, which gives us confidence that we're reaching the students who need it the most. So everything I've talked about so far is the world that most of us live in, the English-speaking world, the US. Some of y'all might be wondering, what about the rest of the planet? And all of these are pictures of Khan Academy used in the rest of the planet, and it's mainly the work of other nonprofits taking our work into villages and into favelas. And they're all pretty powerful stories. Probably the coolest is the one on the top right. I used to give talks like this and say, who knows, maybe one day it'll be used in Mongolia, and then I get a letter from Mongolia. It's the young girl on the top right, her name's Zaya, and she talked about how she uses Khan Academy and enjoys it. And I immediately assumed she's upper middle class or middle class. But then it turns out in her letter, I didn't read it carefully, it turns out there's a group of engineers from Cisco Systems who are going to Mongolia in their vacation and setting up computer labs with internet in orphanages. And the girls in the top right there, those are the Mongolian orphan girls, and Zaya was one of those orphans. And what's been even more powerful is since then, Zaya has graduated from high school and is now one of the top contributors to Khan Academy in the Mongolian language. This is a story I learned about 2 years ago. About 7-8 years ago, Taliban take over a town in Afghanistan. They forbid all the young girls from going to school. One girl in particular, Sultana, she was directly threatened, horrible stuff, acid attacks. So she doesn't go to school. She's at home. She's about 11 or 12 years old. She's doing, by her own accounts, 10 hours of chores a day, cooking, cleaning for her family. Her brother-in-law sees that she's really curious and she wants to learn, and so he gets her a computer with internet. And so that becomes her lifeline to the world. Every waking hour she's on it. She's trying to learn English so she can use the internet better. She gets a hold of a Time magazine that happened to have an article about Khan Academy in it. And so she's like, this is what I need. And so she's just on Khan Academy continuously for the next 4, 5, 6 years. In her own mind, the really powerful moment was when she realized that she was able to learn more than her brothers in the local Taliban-run schools, which isn't a high bar probably. And so she keeps going, and then by the time she's 17, she's gotten through physics, chemistry, biology, calculus, statistics. She decides she wants to become a theoretical physicist, and she wants to study in the United States. So she hears that there's this test called the SAT that will help you get into college in the United States. It's not offered in Afghanistan, so she smuggles herself, lies to her parents, and smuggles herself across one of the most dangerous borders in the world into Pakistan to take the SAT. So if any of y'all have teenagers who are complaining about going on a Saturday morning to tell them this story. She does surprisingly well. That's when I find out about her. We're trying to get her a visa to come to the US. Luckily, Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times finds out about her, writes the story, Meet Sultana, the Taliban's Worst Fear, and she got a humanitarian visa. And today, I spoke to her a couple of weeks ago, Sultana is doing physics research with some of the top physicists in the world, including a Nobel Prize-winning physicist at MIT. So I think whether it's Sultana or Zaya or the students that you're dealing with, we all realize that there's just an unbelievable amount of potential, especially in places where the world has not historically looked. And I think that's the mission that all of us are collectively on. And so that's why it's important to make it as accessible to as many people as possible. And so this is what the screenshots of Khan Academy look like in other languages. And Spanish is the one language, Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese, we have complete parity to what we have in English. And to understand what at least the videos feel like in other languages, I'll show you this.
Me comí 2 cuartos de pizza.
L'hypoténuse commune, ok.
7, 13, 15.
और मैं इस हाथ से इस ब्लॉक को धकेलने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ इस डायरेक्शन में.
توجد قطعتين من معدن النحاس والزنك.
P R به توان 2 ضرب داره.
הגיעה הנקודה שבה שוק הסיום של הזווית חותכת את מעגל היחידה.
Ili muweze kuelewa na kuweza.
Into yokuqala kufuneka siyazi kukuba kubani
16 bölü 16 1'e eşittir.
Muitas outras coisas importantes.
I'm Zaya from Mongolia. We are
we just are so interesting and funny, make more lessons.
I watch that when I get lazy. But so these are just more pictures of Khan Academy being used around the planet. And whenever I see stuff like this, I talk to everyone at all the stakeholders. We have hundreds of thousands of people who've donated. Khan Academy is much more than me now. We have over 200 full-time folks. We've had 14,000 volunteers. We have 500 teacher ambassadors around the country. I hope all of y'all kind of consider, I genuinely think we're part of the same mission of a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, because in the 18th or 19th century, a very beautiful idea of free mass public education. And it did really powerful things for the planet. I would argue that the Industrial Revolution and the middle class that emerged out of it wouldn't have happened without free mass public education. But what y'all do every day, and what we hope by really helping y'all do, we can be part of, is we know that vision is not serving everyone, not even globally or in the US. And that's what we're trying to collectively do. And so I'm excited working with all of y'all as partners that over the next 5, 10, 20 years, I think we definitely have a shot between tools like Khan Academy, between the great schools that are out there, especially a lot of the schools that y'all run, we can make that vision, that dream of a free, world-class education truly available for anyone, anywhere, and make it more like clean drinking water and shelter and just a fundamental human right. Thank you.